The Arizona sun had begun its descent behind the Chiricahua Mountains when Thomas Whitmore first saw the girl standing at the edge of his property. She couldn't have been more than 16, her dark hair catching the copper light like strands of obsidian, her traditional Apache dress dusty from travel. What struck him most wasn't her unexpected presence on his remote ranch, but the way she stood, perfectly still, as if she'd been carved from the same red earth that stretched endlessly around them. Thomas had lived alone for 3 years since his wife passed, and in that time, he'd grown accustomed to silence. But something about this girl's silence felt different. It felt like a question waiting to be asked. "Can I help you?" he called out, his weathered hands instinctively moving to remove his work gloves. The girl didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him with eyes that seemed older than her years, eyes that had witnessed things no child should see. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the evening wind rustling through the mesquite trees. "My grandmother says you're a good man. She says you knew my people before the troubles." She paused, her small hands gripping the worn fabric of her dress. "I need work. I need a place to stay." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He'd heard about the struggles on the reservation, the poverty, the lack of opportunities, the young people leaving in search of something better. But hearing about it and seeing it embodied in this brave, desperate girl were two entirely different things. He thought about turning her away. His ranch was struggling too, barely profitable, and he had no experience caring for a child. Yet something in her dignified stance, in the way she held her chin high despite asking for help, reminded him of his late wife's strength. "What's your name?" he asked, taking a step closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "Naiche," she answered. "It means mischievous one, though my grandmother says I was misnamed. I've been serious since I was small." Over the following weeks, Naiche proved herself invaluable on the ranch. She rose before dawn, worked until her hands were raw, and asked for nothing beyond basic necessities. Thomas converted his late wife's sewing room into a bedroom for her, making sure she had privacy and comfort. He taught her about ranching, about the cattle and the land, sharing knowledge that had been passed down through his own family for generations. In return, she taught him Apache words, told him stories of her ancestors, and slowly, cautiously, began to smile. But there was something peculiar that Thomas couldn't quite understand. Whenever he moved to pat her shoulder in encouragement after a job well done, she would flinch almost imperceptibly and step away. When he reached out to hand her tools or supplies, she would wait for him to set them down rather than take them from his hand. At meals, she sat at the opposite end of the long wooden table, creating an ocean of space between them. At first, he attributed it to shyness or cultural differences. But as months passed and the distance remained, he began to wonder if she was afraid of him. Thomas lay awake many nights, troubled by this invisible barrier. He'd grown to care for Naiche like the daughter he and his wife had never been able to have. He wanted to comfort her when she looked sad, to ruffle her hair when she made him laugh, to offer the simple physical reassurance that families naturally share. But he respected her boundaries absolutely, never pushing, never questioning, simply accepting the strange dance of proximity and distance that defined their relationship. He told himself it was enough to provide for her, to keep her safe, to ensure she had opportunities for education and growth. Physical affection, he reasoned, wasn't necessary to show someone you cared. Yet doubt crept in during the quiet hours. Was his restraint actually distance? Was his respect actually coldness? Did she know, could she possibly know, how much she'd come to mean to him? Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a ferocity that caught even veteran ranchers by surprise. Thomas worked himself to exhaustion ensuring the cattle were protected, the pipes were insulated, and the ranch could weather the storms ahead. Naiche worked beside him every day, her determination never wavering despite the brutal cold. One evening, after a particularly harsh day of work, she collapsed in the barn. Thomas found her there, unconscious in the hay, her lips blue from hypothermia. Terror seized him as he gathered her carefully in his arms, the first time he truly held her, and rushed her into the house. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find, built the fire up until the living room blazed with heat, and sat beside her, helpless and afraid. When she finally opened her eyes hours later, the first thing she saw was his face, etched with worry, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I should have said I was cold. I should have stopped sooner." "No," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I should have been paying better attention. I should have insisted you come inside earlier. Naiche, if something had happened to you." He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He reached out and gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand in the firelight, and something shifted between them. In the days that followed, as Naiche recovered her strength, they began to talk in ways they never had before. She told him about her life before she came to the ranch, about losing her parents in a car accident when she was 12, about living with her elderly grandmother in a home with no running water, about the hunger and the hopelessness that had surrounded her. She spoke of the strength of her people, of their resilience and their pride, but also of the wounds that history had inflicted and that hadn't yet healed. Thomas, in turn, opened up about his own pain. He spoke of his wife, Sarah, and how cancer had taken her slowly, painfully. He described the guilt he felt at his own relief when she'd finally passed, ending her suffering. He confessed his loneliness, his sense of purposelessness after her death, and how Naiche's arrival had given him a reason to wake up each morning. "You saved my life just as much as I gave you a place to stay," he told her one evening as they sat together at the kitchen table, the space between them finally closed. "You gave me back my humanity." It was during one of these conversations, as spring began to green the desert and the ranch came back to life, that Naiche finally asked the question that had haunted her since the beginning. They were mending a fence together, working in comfortable rhythm, when she suddenly stopped and turned to face him. "Thomas," she said, using his first name for only the second or third time since she'd known him. "Can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Of course," he replied, setting down his tools and giving her his full attention. She took a deep breath, her dark eyes searching his face. "You've told me you care about me. You've told me I'm like a daughter to you. But in all these months, you've never touched me, not until I was sick and you had no choice. You've never hugged me or put your arm around my shoulders or even patted my back. Why?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Did my people do something to your family? Do you think touching me would make you dirty somehow? Is it because I'm Apache?" Thomas felt as if the ground had opened beneath him. The pain in her voice, the vulnerability in her question, the terrible misunderstanding that had festered between them, it all crashed over him like a wave. He immediately moved closer, closing the distance she'd always maintained, and looked directly into her eyes. "Naiche, no. God, no. That's not it at all," he said urgently. "I thought you didn't want to be touched. Every time I came near you, you stepped away. Every time I reached toward you, you flinched. I thought you were afraid of me, or that maybe in your culture, it wasn't appropriate, or that you'd been hurt before and needed space. I was trying to respect your boundaries, to keep you safe, to never make you uncomfortable. I've wanted to hug you 100 times, 1,000 times. I've wanted to be the father you lost, to give you the comfort and affection every child deserves. But I thought you didn't want that from me." Naiche's eyes widened, and then, to Thomas's surprise, she laughed, a sound he'd rarely heard from her, bright and clear as a bell. But there were tears in her eyes too, rolling down her cheeks as she shook her head in disbelief. "I was doing the same thing," she said, her voice wavering between laughter and sobs. "I've wanted you to hug me since the first week I was here. Every time you kept your distance, I thought it was because you didn't really want me around, that I was just cheap labor, or that you were being kind but didn't want a real connection. My grandmother used to hold me every night, and I missed that so much my chest would ache. But you always stood so far away, always so formal and polite, and I thought that's how white ranchers were, that showing affection wasn't your way, or worse, that you could never really love an Apache girl like you would your own child. They stared at each other for a long moment, the absurdity and tragedy of their mutual misunderstanding hanging in the air between them. Then Thomas opened his arms, and Naiche fell into them, and they held each other the way they should have months ago, tightly, desperately, with all the love and longing that had been trapped behind walls of fear and misassumption. "I love you," Thomas said into her hair, his voice muffled and thick with emotion. "I've loved you like a daughter from almost the beginning. I love your courage and your strength and your spirit. I love who you are and who you're becoming. And I'm so sorry that I made you doubt that, even for a moment." Naiche clung to him, her small frame shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for months. "I love you too," she whispered. "You're the only father I've ever really known. You've given me everything, safety and home and hope for the future. But I needed this too. I needed to know that you could touch me, that you weren't disgusted by me, that I wasn't just some charity case you were tolerating." They stayed like that until the sun began to set, making up for months of lost embraces, healing wounds neither had fully realized they carried. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing self-consciously and wiping their eyes, Thomas kept one arm firmly around Naiche's shoulders, as if making up for lost time. "How did we get this so wrong?" he asked, shaking his head. "How did two people who care about each other end up so completely misunderstanding what the other needed?" Naiche smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually serious face. "We were both trying to protect each other. We were both so afraid of causing pain that we caused a different kind of pain instead. My grandmother has a saying, the walls we build to protect our hearts often become the prisons that trap them." Over the following weeks, everything changed between them, yet nothing changed. They still worked the ranch together, still shared meals and stories, still planned for the future. But now, Thomas would ruffle Naiche's hair when she made him laugh, would pull her into quick hugs when she looked sad, would rest his hand on her shoulder when teaching her something new. And Naiche would lean against him when they sat on the porch watching the sunset, would take his arm when they walked into town together, would kiss his cheek before heading to bed each night. The physical distance that had defined their relationship disappeared, replaced by the natural, casual affection of family. But their misunderstanding had taught them both something profound about communication and assumption, about the dangers of trying to read minds instead of asking questions, about how our own fears and past wounds can create barriers where none need exist. Thomas began to see how many of his other relationships had been limited by his reluctance to speak openly about his feelings, to express his needs clearly, to risk vulnerability. Naiche realized that her habit of withdrawing when hurt, of assuming rejection rather than seeking clarification, had roots in her childhood trauma and would require conscious effort to overcome. They talked about these revelations during the long spring evenings, sharing insights that went far beyond their own relationship. "I think people are scared," Naiche mused one night. "Scared to say, 'I need you to hug me' or 'I need to know you care.' We think those needs make us weak or burdensome. So we hint and hope and hurt when the other person doesn't read our minds." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "And we're scared to offer comfort too, scared of being rejected or misunderstood or accused of improper motives. So we hold back our natural impulses to reach out, to touch, to comfort. And everyone ends up lonely, even when surrounded by people who love them." News of Thomas and Naiche's relationship spread through the small rural community in the way that news always does in places where everyone knows everyone else's business. Some people whispered, questioning the propriety of a white rancher raising an Apache girl, suggesting ulterior motives or cultural imperialism. But most people, seeing them together in town, the easy affection between them, the obvious love and respect, understood that they'd found something rare and precious, a family built not on biology but on choice, need, and genuine connection. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after Naiche had first appeared at the ranch, Thomas drove her to the reservation to visit her grandmother. The old woman, bent with age but sharp-eyed and strong-spirited, embraced her granddaughter fiercely, then turned to study Thomas with an intensity that made him want to squirm. "You have given her back her smile," the grandmother said finally, speaking in English for his benefit. When she came to you, she was like a plant without water, surviving but not thriving. Now she blooms." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I hear it took you both some time to learn how to speak what was in your hearts." Naiche blushed, and Thomas laughed. "Your granddaughter is wise beyond her years, but apparently neither of us was wise enough to simply ask the questions we needed answered." The grandmother nodded sagely. "Love, true love, requires courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to ask for what you need, to risk rejection or misunderstanding. My granddaughter's mother never learned this. She held her pain inside until it poisoned her spirit and contributed to the accident that took her life. I pray Naiche has learned a different way." As they drove back to the ranch that evening, Naiche was quieter than usual. Finally, she spoke. "My grandmother said something to me in Apache, something she wanted me to tell you." "What was it?" Thomas asked. "She said, 'Thank you for seeing my granddaughter's spirit before you saw her skin. Thank you for giving her the touch of a father's love. In healing her wounds, you have helped heal the wounds between our peoples, one embrace at a time.'" Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. He reached over and squeezed Naiche's hand. "Tell your grandmother that Naiche has healed me just as much. She taught me that family isn't about blood or race or culture, it's about showing up, about choosing each other every day, about having the courage to speak your truth and the wisdom to listen when others speak theirs." The ranch continued to struggle financially. The cattle business was never easy, but Thomas and Naiche made it work through determination, ingenuity, and partnership. Naiche enrolled in the local high school, where she excelled academically, particularly in sciences and literature. She talked about becoming a veterinarian, about helping animals on the reservation where resources were scarce. Thomas encouraged her dreams while making clear she would always have a home with him, no matter where life took her. But perhaps their greatest impact came from simply living their truth in their small community. Other ranchers began reaching out to reservation youth, offering jobs and mentorship. Some families, inspired by Thomas and Naiche's story, opened their homes to foster children or adopted across racial and cultural lines. The local school started a cultural exchange program, bringing Apache elders in to share history and wisdom with all students. "We started something," Naiche said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "Just by figuring out how to love each other, by breaking down our own walls, we showed other people it was possible." Thomas pulled her close, an embrace that had become as natural as breathing. "You started something the day you walked onto this ranch and chose to stay, even when you were afraid. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a conversation. It's asking, 'What do you need?' and being brave enough to answer honestly. It's touching and allowing yourself to be touched, even when you're scared. It's building bridges instead of walls." 2 years after that first evening when Naiche had appeared at the edge of his property, Thomas officially adopted her. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch with Naiche's grandmother present along with a few close friends. But the meaning was immeasurable. When the judge asked if she wanted to change her name, Naiche shook her head firmly. "I want to be Naiche Whitmore," she said clearly. "Naiche honors my ancestors, my blood, my heritage. Whitmore honors the man who chose to be my father, who taught me that family is built on love and courage, not just genetics. I want both names because I am both legacies, Apache and American, traditional and modern, my past and my future together." After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Thomas found a quiet moment alone with Naiche. "Do you remember what you asked me that day at the fence?" he said softly. "When you asked why I'd never touched you?" Naiche nodded, smiling. "I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago." "I love you," the rancher said, Thomas quoted, his eyes twinkling. "Do you remember what you whispered back?" "Then why didn't you touch me?" Naiche finished, laughing. "It sounds so simple now. Why didn't we just talk to each other from the beginning?" Thomas pulled her into another hug, the kind of casual, easy embrace that had become their native language. "Because we're human. We're complicated and scared and carrying wounds we don't always understand. But we learned, didn't we? We learned that love without communication is just good intentions. We learned that assumptions build walls where doors should be. We learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask for what you need. And the bravest thing you can do is offer what someone needs before they have to ask, Naiche added. To reach out, to touch, to show your love in ways that can be seen and felt, not just heard. As the sun set over the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Thomas Whitmore and Naiche Whitmore stood together on their ranch, father and daughter by choice, teacher and student to each other, living proof that the deepest connections often begin with the simplest, most terrifying words, I need you. I love you. Please, show me. Their story spread far beyond their small Arizona community, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so fundamentally human. It reminded people everywhere that love, in all its forms, requires more than good intentions. It requires action, communication, courage, and the willingness to be vulnerable. It requires us to tear down the walls we've built around our hearts and risk the pain of rejection in pursuit of genuine connection. Most importantly, it reminded the world that family is not defined by biology or race or culture, but by the daily choice to show up for each other, to speak truth even when it's frightening, and to offer the healing touch of unconditional love, the kind of love that crosses every divide and transforms everyone it reaches.